explosive car bomb exploded outside of a large federal building in downtown Oklahoma City, shattering that building, killing children, killing federal employees, military men, and civilians.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens, and it was evil.
This morning, the United States of America carried out the severest sentence for the gravest of crimes. The victims of the Oklahoma City bombing have been given not vengeance, but justice.
Welcome to this episode of The Soul Trap. On today's show, we ask one more time, what really happened that fateful day in Oklahoma City, April 19th, 1995? We have been told some truth, but on today's show we ask, do we know all the truth of the Oklahoma City bombing?
Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell them, celebrating people. We gotta stop them. Stop them.
There was a time when conspiracy theories did not abound as they do today. There was a time when, for the most part, we believed in our government. We believed in Mom's apple pie, 4th of July, Harry Carey singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" at the 7th inning stretch. Those days, sadly, tragically, have been gone for many years. But we did not give them away, nor can we say that they were exclusively, slowly lost over time through trickery and social framing of our values and ideals. No, there was something more. The truth is, those days of innocence were ripped away from us by a series of terrorist activities. One could argue that it began on that awful day in November 1963 when the president, in what appeared to be a Masonic ritual, was shot before the nation's eyes. But if we were to get specific, I think we could say that since 1995, 1993, the early 90s, all the way up until and culminating in 9/11/2001, there have been events so shocking, so earth-moving, that they have permanently shaped and molded a vast majority of our collective consciousness and brought to the forefront the conspiracy theorist genre. One of the most early and shocking events that took place was the Oklahoma City bombing, April 19th, 1995. Books have been written, documentaries have been made, theories have been postulated, and yet mainstream media, mainstream awareness for that matter, simply concludes that a lone crazy man, once again, as always, a lone crazy man, was responsible for perpetrating one of the most horrific domestic terrorist events that has ever occurred in the United States of America. The facts, they say, are straightforward. The facts, they claim, are clear and undeniable. But on this episode of The Soul Trap, we ask the question, are they truly clear? Are they truly undeniable? At least as clear and undeniable as we have been led to believe. What happened on that day? Did Timothy McVeigh, alone, by himself, racist, frustrated, angry, set out to blow up a federal building, making a political statement? Is that all there was to it? And by happenstance, by luck, by chance, by serendipity, whatever you want to call it, we managed to catch him as he was making his getaway? Is that what it was? Or is there something more sinister? Are there more questions yet unanswered? Are there facts that have been ignored or truths that have been pushed into the darkest corner of our legal systems in hopes that no one would see it? Are there bodies in tombs because they got too close to those dark corners of hidden truth? Is there something that we learn from Timothy McVeigh about our nation and about ourselves? Today we are going to discuss and let some of these questions come to light, and I hope maybe stir you in your own pursuit of the truth. And I simply ask you this question: are there questions yet unanswered? In an article written by Andrew Gumbel in TheGuardian.com, written April 2015, the title is "Oklahoma City Bombing, 20 Years Later, Key questions remain unanswered. Gumbel writes, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols faced 3 trials and a vast FBI investigation, but many details of their attack remain unexplained. 20 years ago, on April 19, 1995, a disaffected veteran named Timothy McVeigh drove a Ryder truck stuffed with explosive into downtown Oklahoma City and destroyed a federal office building, killing 168 people, including 19 children, maiming hundreds of others. That much, Gumbel writes, we do know. We also know that within 90 minutes of the bombing, McVeigh was pulled over near Kansas, the Kansas border, and arrested alone at the wheel of a glaringly improbable getaway car, an ancient, spluttering rust bucket of a Mercury sedan with no license plates, which made him a sitting duck for any passing highway patrolman. How, Gumbel writes, could such a callous, carefully planned attack have come to such an slapdash end? After a vast investigation headed by the FBI, 3 trials mounted against McVeigh and his co-conspirator Terry Nichols, and an avalanche of court documents, the truth is there still remains no definitive answer to at least that question, and I would submit to you to many more. Gumbel writes, perhaps the most striking thing about Oklahoma City bombing, by far the most destructive act perpetrated by a homegrown assailant against fellow Americans, is not how much we've learned from the past 20 years, but how much we still don't know. Despite the government's insistence that the case has been made and it has been solved, we don't know the exact origin of the plot or how many people carried it out. The federal government, or the federal indictment against McVeigh and Nichols, the latter fronted the money and did most of the bomb's construction for McVeigh, made specific mention of others unknown. And when their trials were almost over, the presiding judge publicly urged the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to keep investigating. However, the plea has fallen on deaf ears. As far as questions go that we still don't have answers to, Gumbel continues to write, we don't know how McVeigh and Nichols learned to build a fertilizer bomb of such size and power. Now, you ought to take a look at some of the pictures of the building, and I digress here from the article for a minute, but you ought to take a look at some of the pictures, close-up shots. This bomb that destroyed the Murrah building, that federal building, which, by the way, was connected by an underground garage with the courthouse. This bomb was not a couple hicks with some fertilizer in the backyard, left over from fertilizing the cow pasture. It was a devastatingly horrific bomb, very technologically precise. And I would argue, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I would argue that there is no way that the destruction that it achieved was from the outside in. It looks like it's from the inside out, but we digress a little bit. The point of the matter is that Gumbel writes in his article, and I believe very accurately so, that there was never brought to trial and never brought out in the course of the trial how these 2 men learned to purchase the material, organize the material, displace the material, and design the bomb to create such a bomb of its power and effect. The article states neither received more than rudimentary explosive training when they served together in the Army, which, again, it is very eerily similar to the lone gunman story of Lee Harvey Oswald, only he was in the Marines, and now we have a lone bombman, only he was in the Army. Gumbel writes, neither received more than rudimentary explosive training when they served together in the Army, and their early experiments with smaller devices were haphazard at best. That much we do know. We don't know the identities of the other people seen with McVeigh on the morning of the bombing. That's right. There are eyewitnesses, and we'll get to them in just a minute, but there are eyewitnesses, more than 20 of them, that were unanimous in telling the FBI that he was not alone. Gumbel writes, there is no ready explanation for a different Ryder truck seen by witnesses at McVeigh's motel in Kansas and at the state park where the bomb was assembled in the week leading up to the bombing. Not only do you have witnesses saying that they saw people with McVeigh, But you have witnesses saying, hey, the truck that he had at the state park and the truck that he had at his hotel, that's not a picture of the truck that we're seeing in the video camera at the bombing. But those questions were never really publicly asked, and they certainly were never publicly answered. No explanation for the other people seen inside McVeigh's hotel room during the same period. Again, very eerily similar to what we know or what we don't know about the Las Vegas shooter. We do know from receipts and we do know from witnesses that there were other people inside of his room. Of course, you've not heard about that, almost nothing. I've not heard about it, but we know it's there. Same thing here. We're told that it's a loner, and when the loner theory of McVeigh couldn't fly, in comes Terry Nichols to save the day. Oh no. The little nerdy, spectacled-wearing patriot militiaman helped him build the bomb, but that's all. But it doesn't add up. The facts don't add up, and we still do not have answers to the questions. Gumbel writes, there is no answer to the fact that inside McVeigh's motel room during the same period, people were seen. No satisfactory explanation of the fact that two people were seen renting the bomb truck on April 17th, neither of them fitting McVeigh's description. Isn't that fascinating? Let me say that again. Witnesses stated that there were two people that rented the truck. However, neither one of them fit Timothy McVeigh's description. An examination of the official investigative files on the Oklahoma City bombing run into about 1 million pages of material. You heard that right. 1 million pages of material. And again, it is eerily similar to the same modus of operandi. Have you ever read the Warren Commission report? It is a mammoth document. Have you ever read the Commission on 9/11, the report? It is a mammoth document. You see, they put so much in there that it's hard to actually even pick out what is right and what is true and what is wrong and what is false. The investigative files run into the millions of pages. But it does little, Gumbel writes, to bolster the assertion of Frank Keating, a former FBI agent who was Oklahoma governor in 1995, that, quote, 2 evil men did this and 2 evil men paid. A former FBI agent who was governor in the state where the most awful domestic terrorist attack took place, and that under highly suspicious circumstances. I'm sure there's absolutely no connection, but it sure is eerily similar to the fact that we had 9/11 when George W., the son of the New World Order king himself, was in place to make sure that everything ran appropriately. Of course, these are simple coincidences. They always are. Gumbel writes in his article that the fact of the matter is the investigative files do little to bolster the assertion that this is an open and shut case. Rather, it does the opposite. The impression confirmed by the memories of frontline investigators and lawyers who prosecuted the case but did not speak independently about it for many years is of leads left dangling or shut down instead of being pursued with the FBI's customary vigor. Even as the government struggled to find conclusive evidence that McVeigh had been at the key locations in the bomb plot. Now let me quote that again from Gumbel. Even as the government struggled to find conclusive evidence that McVeigh had been at the key locations in the bomb plot or had been there with nobody but Nichols, his role was expanded in the official narrative from leading suspect to sole mastermind. An unprecedented McVeigh, or an unrepentant, I should say, McVeigh, Gumbel writes, chose in the end to speed up his own death sentence. He waived his right to further appeals, reinforcing the government's mastermind theory by writing with a self-aggrandized book-length letter an account to 2 reporters. In 2001, can you remember anything big happening in 2001? Again, I'm sure it's coincidence. In 2001, McVeigh went to the execution chamber. It's not just conspiracy theorists who doubt, Gumbel writes, McVeigh dreamed up the plot by himself and carried it out with just Terry Nichols for help. Larry Mackey, The number 2 prosecutor, now listen to this line very closely. Again, we're not talking about some guy sitting in a trailer somewhere with a tinfoil hat on. We're talking about the number 2 prosecutor against McVeigh, Larry Mackey. The number 2 prosecutor against McVeigh, Gumbel writes, and the lead prosecutor against Terry Nichols, mind you, has acknowledged his team did not entirely believe it either. Quote, Mackey states, if you had said to us, anybody in the room 100% confident that McVeigh was alone, raise your hand, we would have all kept our hands in our laps. But if the official narrative of the bombing is incomplete or wrong, the question is, what really happened? The Ryder truck was first seen downtown around 8 a.m., 50 minutes before McVeigh later claimed to have arrived. 50 minutes later than when he claimed to have arrived, but could not get into the garage because the truck was too tall. Can you imagine that? Don't you have to ask yourself, all the planning on how to make a bomb, drive the bomb there, all the quote-unquote mastermind that went into this, and they can't get the bomb in because the truck is too tall for the entrance of the garage. Another question that often comes up is, who exactly were the people that were seen with McVeigh? Listen to this audio clip, and if you're able to watch the video online, watch the clip and listen to these people as they confirm the fact that Timothy McVeigh was not, yea, could not have been alone.
In just released FBI documents, Oklahoma City bombing co-conspirator Terry Nichols says there was somebody else helping Timothy McVeigh.
But he won't say who it is. Eyewitness News 5's Amanda Guerra has the new details.
Sheriff's up. Here he comes. Mr. McVeigh! Mr. McVeigh!
They are the faces now engraved in the minds of Oklahomans. 2 men who caused such anger and heartache. But nearly 16 years later, the question remains, is there a third? This man, a John Doe number 2.
Well, clearly there is a John Doe number 2.
Stephen Jones is another man Oklahomans know all too well. He was Timothy McVeigh's attorney.
I think the principal reason that they went public and said there was no John Doe 2 was simply they couldn't identify him at that time. I don't know that they've ever identified him.
The idea of a John Doe number 2 stems from Elliott's Body Shop in Kansas. Investigators say it was here Timothy McVeigh rented the Ryder truck used to hold the explosives. Employees thought McVeigh wasn't alone. Jones says McVeigh told him the same thing.
If you take Tim McVeigh's words at face value and you take the words of the other 3 employees at Elliott's Body Shop, there is another person present.
And in these just released court documents from his jail cell, Terry Nichols is backing the story. In a 2005 interview, Nichols said, quote, clearly someone else was involved in renting the Ryder truck, that he knew the identity of John Doe number 2, but refused to reveal it. Nichols told investigators, quote, he feared for his and his family's well-being.
With regard to Terry Nichols, it's in his interest to keep this stirred up.
Bob Ricks is now the chief of police in Edmond, but back up 16 years, Ricks was an FBI agent and one of the lead investigators in the bombing.
I believe there was not a John Doe number 2.
Ricks says the person matching this sketch was eventually identified.
John Doe number 2 was just a military individual that was in there with a friend renting a Ryder truck.
He argues no matter what skeptics say, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols are the main 2 people responsible for the bombing, one of whom is now dead, the other spending his life in prison.
The principal characters who have gone through 2 separate trials and the appeals have gone all the way to the Supreme Court affirming those decisions, we believe have been identified and prosecuted.
Amanda Guerra.
There's still another issue at hand. And that is the issue that arises, really the difference between the descriptions of who actually rented the truck, as we mentioned earlier, and McVeigh and Nichols, who were reported to have rented it. We also don't know the identities of the original John Does 1 and 2, the people who rented the bomb truck under an alias in Junction City, Kansas, and whose sketches were circulated widely in the days after the bombing. The FBI could never convincingly show, now listen to this again, the FBI could never convincingly show how McVeigh got to the rental shop himself from a McDonald's where he was captured on surveillance tape shortly before the timestamp on the rental agreement. In other words, they don't even know how he got there. They don't know where he came from, and they don't know where he went. What we do know is that the government showed little interest in answering these questions once the case against McVeigh and Nichols was set. It's sort of like once we arrested Lee Harvey Oswald and the narrative was set, we're done. Once we're told that this was a disgruntled gambler who decided to crawl up into the top of the Mandalay Bay and shoot people with unprecedented accuracy with a bump stock 400 yards away in high winds, we're done. Once we're told Building 7 came down in exactly the same manner as both towers, though it was not hit with the superheated jet fuel, we're done. But are we done? It really never did make sense, and as usual, there is a story that is true. We agree with that. There is a story that happens in real time and space, and then there is the story that is shaped, the story that is massaged to fit the narrative, that the co-conspirators want to fit the narrative. Some directly, some indirectly. How much has the story of the Oklahoma City bombing been massaged to fit the narrative? Whatever that narrative may have been, may even be to this day. That is one of the underlying questions that demands to be asked and to be answered. One thing that has stood out to me personally are the initial reports. Now, to be fair, eyewitness accounts cannot always be trusted and counted on. In moments of stress, officers, first responders will tell you that oftentimes people mistake what they think they're seeing. Fair enough. But as a Bible believer, one of the things that's interesting to me is that the story of the gospel, or the definition of the gospel in 1 Corinthians, is stated that it is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then the writer of Corinthians, Paul, says that as many as 500 saw him at one time. Now for me, the frame of reference always comes through the Bible, and that seems to tell me that there is validation in the numerical power of those that saw that event. Now I know that I'm digressing just a little bit, but bear with me. One of the things that has, as I said already, always stood out to me are the initial reports. When we're not talking about 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 15. No, we're not talking about a little. We're talking about over and over again. We are told that it was not just a single truck, not just a single explosion, but that there were bombs, multiple, and that there were bombs still going off after the first initial explosion, and that there were bombs being found throughout the day. Listen to the audio, watch the video of the events taking place live at that time, and you tell me, was this a single truck, or was there something more sinister and nefarious taking place?
One explosion caused, because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. So try to imagine 2 or 3-fold happening what we've already seen there. It is just incredible to think that there was that much heavy artillery that was somehow moved into the downtown Oklahoma City Federal Building.
2 other explosive devices were found that were not detonated, and they were larger than the first.
I think he said another bomb.
Another bomb, move back. Oh my God, another bomb.
We just saw, if you were watching there was a white pickup truck backing a trailer into the scene here. They're trying to move people out of the way so they can get it in. Appears to be the Oklahoma County Bomb Squad. It's their bomb disposal unit, essentially, is what it is, and it is what they would use to, if the report that we gave you just a few moments ago turns out to be correct, that they have found a second explosive device of some kind inside this building. They'll back that trailer down there, and the bomb squad folks will go in, and they will use that that trailer. You see the bucket on the back there, sort of, this is how they would transport the explosive device away from this populated area to try to do something with it.
The Justice Department is reporting that a second explosive device has been found in the AP Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. Mike, you're still with us, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I might tell you in addition to that, that in fact what we were told at the scene a few minutes ago was that in fact 2 different explosive devices were found in addition to the one that went off.
So a total of 3.
A total of 3.
Now confirmed through federal authorities that a second bomb has been found inside that federal building in Oklahoma City. It was an explosion at 9 o'clock this morning that did that damage you're looking at right there, blowing off the entire north face of that building. Again, you're looking at the north face there. A second bomb was found on the east side of that building. A bomb squad is on the scene. That second bomb has not exploded. We don't know quite the status yet, if they've managed to defuse it, but it has been confirmed that a second bomb was found on the east side.
The report I have is that one device was deactivated. Apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device.
So President Clinton just called Governor Frank Keating, and he says that 3 FBI anti-terrorist teams are en route to Oklahoma City. Right now, they are saying that this is the work of a sophisticated group. This is a very sophisticated device, and it has to have been done by an explosives expert, obviously with this type of explosion.
The medical teams downtown are unable to get into the wreckage to retrieve more of the injured because of the presence of other bombs in the area.
I just took a look down the street at the Murrah building again. I see another bomb truck going, so apparently they're going to try to get out that third bomb that's been talked about. Still a lot of activity around the Murrah building. Security concerns that another one still might go up.
Fortunately, it didn't, because the second device that they found, we understand, was even more powerful than the first. They then found a third device, and you can see the look on this woman's face at the fear that she might have to go through the same thing again. They then found a third device, which was also larger than the first. Hard to feel lucky at this point, but certainly through some good work by some munitions experts and the explosive sniffing dogs, further tragedy has almost certainly been averted here.
But it was a great stroke of luck that we actually have got diffused bombs. It's through the bomb material that we will be able to track down who committed this atrocity.
There is also the case of the missing time right before the bombing took place. Now, we are living today, 2020, when everything is videoed. I mean, everything. You're watching a video. We have it on our phones. Back in 1995, not so much. It was a little bit different than it is today. A little bit different. Quite a bit different. But the fact of the matter is, there were still a lot of video cameras around. We're talking about a federal building. We're talking about a courthouse. We're talking about a downtown area. Now, the reality is that right before the bombing took place, security cameras, not 1, not 2, but 4 that we know of, if not more, went black about 4 to 5 minutes right before the bombing took place. This is not speculation. This is clearly documented by the AP, by Michael Savage, and by others.
Oklahoma City bomb tapes appear to be edited. I don't know if you saw that story. That's a mind blower. Did you read that story? It came out of the Associated Press, not covered by the midstream media. But the secret security tapes showing the chaos immediately after the 1995 bombing of the Oklahoma City federal buildings are blank in the few minutes before the blast on all the cameras around the building. This came out as a result of a Freedom of Information lawsuit filed by a man who lost his brother in it. And it's very suspicious that all 4 security cameras would have gone blank 4 minutes prior to the bombing of the Oklahoma City federal building. Now, as you well know, Hitler had his Reichstag fire. Some think the Oklahoma City bombing was a government conspiracy to prop up Bill Clinton during the dark days of Monica Lewinsky. I am not a conspiracist, so I don't believe that. I believe something else is being covered up.
Well, there you have it. We're simply asking questions, and I think that our questions are fair questions. We also have to ask ourselves, how do we reconcile the fact that McVeigh was captured in the way and manner that he was? This one to me has always been a very, very fascinating one. It's not just that he was captured, though that is interesting in and of itself. It's how he reacted. This terrorist, this patriot, this man that was willing to do whatever it took to avenge the Waco disaster. This man that was willing to kill innocent women and children. What did he do to get away? Well, the first thing he did was drive a bright yellow Mercury. Look at the pictures. If you're able to watch the video, look at the pictures. It's not your best getaway car. It stands out. Secondly, the car had no tag on it. I mean, let's say, for instance, that you don't care and you're driving away. In other words, the other question that I have is, and this kind of goes back a little bit, but how did he get to that Mercury? So if you've got a Ryder truck and he's alone, who drove the Mercury downtown? We know from reports at least one woman reported seeing Timothy McVeigh and talking to him directly after the bombing. And he was leaning up against a yellow Mercury. So did he get it down there the day before? How long did that Mercury stay downtown without a license tag, without some meter maid coming along and riding it up? So he risks driving into town with a bright Mercury, yellow Mercury. You got to look at the pictures, no tag on it, and then he's driving away with no tag on it. Not only that, but he was driving over the speed limit. Not a little, a lot. Enough to draw attention. Bright yellow raggedy car, no tag, going over the speed limit. When he got pulled over, he had anti-government material on the front seat. Not only that, but Timothy McVeigh was armed. Now, this was a man that was just willing to kill hundreds of people. He was armed. He's fighting the man, right? He's against the man. What does he do? Does he shoot the man? Does he take the man captive? Does he go out in a glorious ball of flame and fire and virile? And no. He mildly, meekly tells the officer that he's armed and allows himself to be disarmed. Look at the pictures yourself. They are stunning, fascinating. All the pictures do is beg us to ask more questions, like why, how, and is this even reasonable? And then, of course, another question that often doesn't get asked, but by those that are in the know, it does. That is, what about the man who knew too much? Literally. Who killed Kenneth Trentadue? If you're not familiar with the Kenneth Trentadue, Trentadue, you need to read that story. A lot of people died after the Oklahoma City bombing. Very similar to the shooting of Kennedy, very similar to the Las Vegas shooter. A lot of people died afterwards. Kenneth Trentadue is one. In a Reddit article, the story of Kenny Trentadue is one of the most twisted, the writer states, I've ever encountered. The basic summary is this. Kenneth Trentadue was a former heroin addict and petty thief who was arrested in 1995 for a parole violation while crossing from Mexico into California. He was then unexpectedly shipped to Department of Justice's Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City. He spoke to his brother Jesse on the phone and sounded, quote-unquote, to his brother chipper, according to Jesse. 3 days later, however, he was found hanging dead in his cell. It was ruled a suicide. Now, man, where have we come across that before? Guys hanging themselves in their cell because they might have known too much. I can't recall that. I can't quite recall that off the top of my head, but man, it sounds familiar. Anyway, officials tried to obtain the permission of Trentadue's family to cremate the body at the government's expense, an unprecedented move, but the family declined since they found the claims of suicide suspicious. But the family just didn't believe what they were hearing. The government then performed an autopsy on Trentadue, but did not notify the family. Why would they do that? They want to go out of their way to bury this heroin addict that got popped coming in from Mexico. They want to perform an autopsy on what was obviously a suicide. When the family received the body from prison authorities, it was covered in wounds, cuts, and bruises, leading the family to believe Trentadue had been tortured and beaten before his death. Trentadue had sustained 3 heavy blows to the head, and his throat had been cut. Of course, prison authorities claimed that the wounds were self-inflicted. Okay, got to give the prison authorities a break there. I mean, who hasn't beat the crap out of themselves, hung themselves, and felt like, I'm going to top it off with a nice, neck slit? Really? The day after Trentadue's death, the writer at Reddit here states, Kevin Rowland, the chief investigator of the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner, filed a complaint with the FBI, reporting, this is the greatest understatement maybe of all time, irregularities in the investigation of Trentadue's death. The coroner was at first not permitted into the cell when Trentadue had died, and the cell itself was washed out before any investigation could be performed. Boy, they're going out of their way a lot for a little drug addict who killed himself, aren't they? The complaint went on to state that although the exact cause of death could not be determined, the claim that Trentadue had committed suicide was not consistent with the medical examiner's findings, and Trentadue appeared to have been tortured. The FBI paperwork from the agent who received the medical examiner's call reads, quote, murder, and, quote, believes that foul play is suspected in this matter. So you say, what does this petty drug user have to do with the Oklahoma City bombing? Well, Jesse Trentadue and others ultimately came to believe that Kenneth had been mistakenly identified by authorities as an accomplice in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. It is supposed that Trentadue was interrogated to make him talk and died during the interrogation. After being shown a picture of Kenneth Trentadue, Timothy McVeigh is reported to have said, "Now I know why Trentadue was killed, because they thought he was Richard Guthrie. Do your own homework on Richard Guthrie, Guthrie. It is contended that Trentadue was mistaken for Richard Lee Guthrie Jr. I'll give you one guess who he is. Well, he's a member of the Aryan Republican Army, members of which were thought to have associated with McVeigh and were the subject of FBI investigation. The two men shared a strong physical resemblance. They were the same height, weight, and build. Both had thick mustaches and both had dragon tattoos on their left arm. Both are thought to have resembled the description of, wait for it, John Doe number 2. The never apprehended possible third conspirator in the bombing along with McVeigh and Terry Nichols. Less than 1 year after Trentadue's death, Guthrie would also be found dead in his prison cell. Wow! What a coincidence. The one guy they mistook, he gets killed. But then they finally found their man, and he gets killed. Guthrie would also be found dead in his prison cell the day before he was scheduled to give a television interview. His death was also ruled a suicide by hanging. A lot of people out there, for the Trentadue family and others, want to know the truth. It's not just us asking questions. There are others asking questions. So, who was Timothy McVeigh really? We haven't even scratched the surface of who this cat was. Was he a part of the Aryan Republican Army? Was he a lone actor? Was he a part of a bigger program, a bigger plan? Maybe a plan that had gone wrong, or maybe he was a patsy. Who was Timothy McVeigh really? What happened on that day? Was there another John Doe? Were there 2 John Does? Were there 3, 4? Or was the biggest John Doe of all the deep state? Why did he act the way that he did and not conceal himself? Why did he not kill the officer that had stopped him? Why did he drive a getaway car that actually said, "Catch me, I'm here, I'm the one"? We may never know the truth of these and many other questions, but we do know that the world has changed. It has changed in a vastly profound way. And it's very interesting and very telling to note that while churches in the 90s were learning to be seeker-sensitive and suburban, while preachers and Christians were going mainstream and having worship wars, the world beneath our feet was moving ever more into a darkness a sinister and more shadowy land, somewhere between two worlds, and somewhere in the shadows of Oklahoma City.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.